Travis Brown. I'm the general manager at Titan Forge Games.
Hi, I'm PonPon, and I'm an advanced game designer at Titan Forge Games working on Smite 2.
Hey, I'm Alex Cantatore, and I'm the executive producer of Smite.
And we're here at the Smite World Championships, the 10th. Like 10 years of this game, 10 years of competition. Why now? Why now with Smite 2 as opposed to like in previous years? And what were the risks associated with like making that jump?
I think in general, like, we know that we built a great Smite game, and over the 10 years that we built it, we've added on more gods, more exciting moments, more effects that we have to keep track of, more status effects, more god mechanics, and those types of things build into starting from the foundation of Smite 1. When you build on top of that, it's a chance for Smite 2 to reset us to a new baseline where we know all the things that we want, and we can build those systems and foundation a little bit more stronger for the next 10 years in the future. So it's kind of like when we got to, I think, our next god is 130th god. We have so many of those mechanics that this is a good time for us to kind of reestablish that route. But primarily, it's because we wanted to make it on UE5. UE5 gives us a lot more tools than the game that we built 10 years ago on UE3. So the tool set that's available to us on UE5, obviously the upgraded graphics, things that gives us an opportunity to kind of not only reset mechanically, but also like just build the game that can grow into the next 10 years as well.
You had also asked about like biggest risks of going down this path, right? And I think that the biggest risk from the start was like, how do we transition from Smite 1 to Smite 2 in a way that our community would be happy with, right? Because we've seen a lot of games that have tried to do sequels to live service games. And I think everybody's they've done some things really well, and they've done some things that their communities have been unhappy with, right? It's a hard world to find the right way to go forward in. So we did a lot of work talking to our community, talking internally about how could we make a sequel to Smite in a way that worked and we could actually execute it, but was still as respectful and honored our community's spend in time and achievements as much as it possibly could. So it's definitely a challenge. I think the systems that we came up with are strong. But yeah, that's definitely the biggest risk, was figuring out how we're going to move from Smite 1 to Smite 2.
And obviously, like, moving to Unreal Engine 5 means that not only do you have to you can't just throw the characters that you had from the original into the new one. You kind of have to build from the ground up. Has that been a challenge? Has it been exciting? Has it been exhilarating? Speak to that process a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's been an incredible thing to try and figure out how to bring these characters to life in UE5 and just figuring out what we wanted to do with them. We tried looking at them and just importing them raw, but we realized that there was so much on the table left with UE5 that we really want to take that next step, do the remodeling to make them look cool, do the ability updates, do the graphical updates to the VFX, take advantage of why we actually moved to UE5 in the first place. And then on top of that, we also have the back-end gameplay ability system, which just allows designers and even VFX artists can go in there and start to build out logic and unblock themselves rather than having the general pipeline of having to go talk to a programmer and getting things done that way. It just frees up everyone to individually have agency over making the coolest thing they possibly can.
I've heard from some other developers that thanks to the tools in UE5, it's almost like it's a bit easier to do large-scale work, like where I've talked to indie developers that say it pairs the work of a whole team down to one person can do that. And can you speak to that process a little bit when it comes to the design of a champion or of a god in UE3 versus the design of a champion in UE5?
Yeah, UE3 is everything is a struggle, right? Everything takes 5 times as long as it needs to in UE4, and then UE5 makes it even faster. So go for it.
So I have 2 really good examples of this. One is just how characters are animated and actually working through the whole process. Before, it's 3 different programs that different artists are working in, and you have to make sure that you can sync all the things together, and if you have to change, you have to go back to that base program, re-import, make sure it actually works within the constraints of UE3. But for example, we have things like Control Rig, which you talk about indie devs can actually use and make sure that their characters actually have a riggable model in the engine. And so if they want a new animation, rather than having to go out to external programs, they can do that all baked in there, and it can actually enforce restrictions that are needed for the game to function within that, rather than having the potential risk of having it outside the game engine. And then for designers, if you want to just prototype something, you can just put it together yourself and actually see if it works, versus having the risk of I think this could work, but am I confident enough in it right now without really being able to feel it out to have a whole team of people dedicate their time to that? And so it just lets individuals have more of that time to really prove out their concepts and make sure that when they do need the other teams to come in and help them, everyone's way more efficient for it because we have a lot more buy-in and a lot more trust that's going to really be good.
In UE5, using the gameplay ability system, he can put together a god kit, a playable god kit from scratch in a couple of hours, whereas it used to take multiple weeks of a programmer's time to actually build the functionality into each god that we create. Now we're able to just prototype full god kits in a day.
Obviously, you still need polish after that,
Yeah.
right? But you can rough it out, and roughing it out is like half the battle when you want to be able to play test things, right? Like the biggest thing about making games is playing them, because you don't know if it's going to be fun until you play it, right? So getting something that you can play as soon as you can is just game changing.
Yeah, no matter how much experience you have, if you think your ability is really, really cool, there's a good chance you go to the playtest stage and go, there's like an unsolvable problem here. We have to go back to the whiteboard, we have to go back to the chalkboard and really rethink this. And so anything to mitigate that as a chance is just really good.
On a long enough timeline, do you foresee just being able to bring all 130 gods over to Smite 2?
I think the goal is to get to 100 gods as quickly as feasibly possible, right? We know that people have their favorite gods in Smite 1, and there's certain people that aren't going to move over to Smite 2 until that god is there waiting for them. One of our Olympians, which is our player council, they elect their own representatives. It's great. His name is Opwash. Opwash is one of our gods. Not his real name, obviously. But, his handle is Opwash. And when we told him about Smite 2, the first thing he asked was, and Opwash is going to be there on day one, right? And we're like, well, Op probably isn't going to be there on day one. And he's like, okay, but he's going to be there soon, right? So we understand that our players want to see all of these gods that they love in Smite 2. But we also understand that a lot of new players don't try Smite or a lot of the other MOBAs because there are so many characters that initial knowledge cliff that you have to learn is overwhelming. There's each god has 4 abilities and a passive. That's 5 times 130 gods is almost 600 different abilities that you need to know to play the game. That's a ton to learn. It's crazy. I only know because I've been playing since beta, right? Yeah. So by starting with a smaller number and then relatively quickly growing that number, we feel like we can both make a game that's more approachable for people that have wanted to get into MOBAs but were overwhelmed by just the number of things you need to learn to start, and then also have everybody's favorite god there waiting for them as soon as possible.
Like, one of the things with moving from one game to another is like the content. Nobody that has spent years playing this game necessarily wants to start over from square one and collect everything that they had before, right? And so you've talked a little bit here in the announcement about like the legacy gems and the transference system. And just like how did that conversation go about how you were going to make sure that the transfer from Smite 1 to Smite 2 was just as pain-free as possible?
So it started, like I said, day one of our starting goals was like, how do we honor and respect our players' time, achievements, and money? I think we've said that phrase a million times internally. Like, feels like we're saying it a lot, but it's because we say it a lot internally. And we really thought, like, what are the systems that we can build that do that, right? Understanding the restriction of we couldn't just port every skin from Smite 1 UE3 to UE5 unless we wanted Smite 2 to release in 6 years. That's about how long it would take us to get through everything. So we went to the drawing board and we came up with these systems where with legacy gems, you're going to get every gem, which is our currency that you've ever spent in Smite, waiting for you in Smite 2. And you can use that to pay for 50% of most things that you can buy. So all skins, events, battle passes, everything's half off until you've worked through your legacy gems. And then we also have a system called Divine Legacy, where it looks at how much you've played Smite 1, what your achievements are, and then it gives you rewards in Smite 2 accordingly. So you're going to get a bunch of skins, and you're going to get badges to show off some of your specific accomplishments. So we maybe can't port, Archon Thanatos, which is old skin that is very prestigious if you own.
Tier 5.
But you're going to have a badge that you can show off in Smite 2 that I owned the skin in Smite 1. You're also going to have a badge to show off your exact mastery level of each god from Smite 1 and Smite 2. So if you were a dedicated Aphrodite player and you've got 80 stars and you put your life into it, you can show that off in Smite 2, even though we're starting in a new game. So hopefully people feel like, hey, they understand that the time and money that I put into this is valuable, and we're reflecting that in Smite 2 the best that we feasibly could. And yeah, we spent a lot of time developing this. We pitched it to our internal Olympians and pro players and whatnot a lot of times. One of our pro players actually tweeted today, like, when they first presented this transition plan to us, I didn't think it was very good, but then when they came out with this today, I think that's pretty good. So hopefully more people feel like it's pretty good than not. There's always people that are going to be a little bit disappointed that they aren't getting everything. But again, this was kind of the best that we can do, and I think I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out.
The Smite World Championships, this is a celebration of all things Smite. Like, this is pro players, this is casual players, this is fans coming together. It's like a festival out there. I just want to ask, like, how hard is it to go into this transition and make sure that not only is Smite 2 something that's going to be appealing to the esports teams that have come this far, but also appealing to the like casual player that has maybe never even jumped into Smite 1 before?
In Smite 1, that's a balance act we've had to walk a whole bunch already, making sure the game that we're making is competitively viable, but also making sure casuals can pick it up and approach it. And so we have that 10 years of learning with a whole team of people who, a lot of us have just come from the community, so we're invested in that because we want this game to succeed, we want this game to be approachable, and we also want this game to be competitive. We can take all those lessons and consolidate them into Smite 2, trying to pick the best parts of all the stuff that we've learned, all our experiments, what succeeded, what's failed, and really refine that down to something that feels really good for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, when you watch these games out here, you hear the cheering and whatever, you have a passionate fan base that loves the game, especially the competitive side. They're very invested, and we want to make sure that we're doing right by them. We bring them into conversations. We've shown them this plan months ago, and we get in conversations with them about making sure we keep the integrity for the competitive scene intact. But we do know that we have a huge opportunity here to kind of engage new players that we haven't been able to reach before, because it's a very daunting 130 god roster, right? Very daunting game to get into. So we're going to make sure that we're keeping in touch with our community on the pro side and the Olympians, and on new players, bringing them in to make sure that we're getting all three perspectives as we build, the starting point for what Smite 2 is.
Yeah. And I love our Olympians and pro players. They're not afraid to tell us if they think we're making a mistake. And they'll put the time in and the effort in to give us their reasons, justification. We'll go back and talk through with them and see where they're struggling with it, where they're not struggling with it, where we might be missing something, and then we'll adjust our plan accordingly based off that feedback. So having them and having someone who's willing to give you that critical feedback and engage in that dialogue has been super critical for us.
It's been mentioned before, but Smite 1 isn't going away. It's still going to be playable. Players are going to be able to enjoy everything that they've enjoyed for the last 10 years. And you're even adding a new god was announced here today. And I just kind of wonder, as you develop Smite 1 and Smite 2 simultaneously now, are buffs and nerfs and adjustments going to be one-to-one, or how do you handle that balancing act of balancing two games now?
Yeah, I think Smite 1 and Smite 2 are kind of distinct games, right? They're obviously similar, but they're going to stay separate. And I think that people that like the way Smite 1 plays now, Smite 1 is going to kind of continue down the path that it's on right now, right? It's going to be further evolution and refinement of that version of Smite. A lot of the new things that are coming to Smite 2, the item system is completely different, the relic system is completely different, the map is completely different. Those things are going to stay in Smite 2, and we're focusing more on, evolving the Smite 1 formula for people who like that and keeping that as a viable alternative for people who want to play it, right? Very frequently I have seen where I loved the first one of a game, and then the second one comes out, and they changed something I didn't like. And I would rather be playing the first one. If we change the first one to be like the second one, then people that like the first one don't have that opportunity anymore. So it's important to us to keep it true to what it is and what people like. And also, one of the big reasons to keep it running, right, is that it runs on Xbox One, on PlayStation 4, on Switch, on lower-end hardware, right? Whereas the new Smite 2 is going to be on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, So if our fans, they don't have the money for the new gen console, if they don't have the money to upgrade, right, that's fine with us, right? Keep playing Smite, keep having a good time. You're part of our community, and we want you to stay part of our community. We don't want you to be left out in this transition.
Other characters, when we were bringing in Anubis, right before we brought Anubis into UV5, they changed Anubis to be able to walk during his Plague of Locust ability. And previously he was self-rooted, and so that was a really big change. And so we had to sit there on our team and go, does that fit with our goals for what we want for Anubis? Is that an improvement that we want to bring over to Smite 2? Or do we want to potentially pull that back or just do something completely different? And so on a case-by-case basis, as Smite 1 does different design decisions, working through that now on some upcoming characters, we kind of get to pick and choose what we feel works best with our values, knowing that Smite 1 exists, it's going to stay there, people can play that, they like that version. We can focus on making Smite 2 the version of Smite 2 that we want to be making and putting forward for people.
2023 was kind of a brutal year for games as a service. Like there were a lot of, I would say, good ones that fell along the way. And like, what do you think gives the Smite IP the power to keep going where other games that weren't even all that bad kind of fell along the path?
To some extent, like we saw that firsthand as as our parent studio, Hi-Rez, right, launched a game called Divine Knockout, DKO, at the very end of 22, right, that, didn't really find the audience that we had hoped it would, right? And there are a lot of games that have a similar story over the past year. I think that what's different about Smite, from my perspective, is, it's got a huge, passionate player base that's loved this game for 10 years, right? And if you are a Smite player, the number of people whose Twitter bios are X-Bio, whatever the hell, the Twitter bio is, I'm John, I'm 19, I live in Ohio, and I'm a mid laner in Smite, right? Like, that's a core part of your identity for a lot of people. And I think there's just something magical about the game that sets it up to succeed and take this huge, passionate fan base into a next generation where newer games that haven't established that fan base already have a harder time, unfortunately, right now, because there's just so much stuff coming out.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, games that we've seen be successful over the last year have been games that have been built off of their existing IP. So when you have an existing IP and you're able to make a number 2 that people have been clamoring for, the fans that are going crazy out there in the esports scene right now, they've been asking for engine improvements. They've been asking for, what about UE5? So we know we have a fan base that's already hungry for it, and building on the Smite IP is something that just feels natural.
Yeah, and just, I think our fans are just something special. Like, I think all of us, when they were all cheering, I think all of us kind of teared up a little bit, just seeing how dedicated everyone was. And you can go ask people out there, and a lot of them are modern Smite players, but some of them are like, yeah, I played during launch, Season 1, Season 2, Season 3. I still come to these events because I like the community here. I still keep in touch with everything, and the fact that Smite 2 is coming, I'm excited to jump back in. I think it's hard-pressed to find people who'd be willing to come to an event for like a World Championship of a game that they're not super actively playing in just because they really love the community. And that's just something that we've fostered over time for so long that I think it gives us a lot of legroom to actually still succeed in 2023, where it was hard for a lot of other games.